Joining me now here on the Knicks Film School podcast. No, this is not a pregame pod, but a returning guest to the show because he once told me that I have nothing to worry about when it came to the Knicks and Isaiah Hartenstein. And lo and behold, here we are 2 months later. Some things have changed. The Thunder season ended a way that we actually discussed 2 months ago when he was on the Knicks Film School pregame pod, but maybe some calculations have been changed to what teams have needed from the it's the Down to Dunk podcast, I believe. Mr. Andrew Schlecht, also of The Athletic. Andrew, good morning, sir. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I don't want to fully jump into the Hartenstein thing yet. You're a producer, so you understand the time spent listening algorithm that I'm about to fudge. Mm-hmm. But I do have some questions about the Thunder and their season because I rewatched our conversation from March, the end of March, earlier this morning, and my initial takeaway from the first 10 minutes was that the Thunder fan base and more specifically the organization was viewing this year as not necessarily a grateful to be here experience, but that we're ahead of schedule and there's a lot of young guys with no playoff experience. If this ends in a second round exit, it'll be looked at as a successful season. And then the other part of that conversation was that at the time of that recording, the Timberwolves were the 1 seed, the Thunder were the 2 seed, and the Nuggets were the 3 seed. And there's no shame in getting eliminated by the defending champs. Now, fast forward to how this season ended for them, and they lose to the Mavericks in a very close series. I don't think people realize how close it was. The exact identical offensive rating and points per games in the series by both teams. And I'm sure I don't have to tell you, if a foul is not called or if we're not committed at the end of Game 6, we're potentially even playing a Game 7. But the Thunder season ended in the second round, as we talked about. So my first question is that perspective still amongst the fan base that it was just happy, like we're happy to be here ahead of schedule, or is there some disappointment to how the season ended?
Yeah, I think there was disappointment because I think Thunder fans saw the conference finals in their grasp. And then it was role players like PJ Washington and Derek Jones that took it away from them because Kyrie and Luka didn't play great against OKC. It was their role players that did. And now they're watching them just miss everything in the finals. And it's frustrating to them. But part of it is that they allowed the Mavs to get to the corners and they allowed them to shoot corner threes. I've heard people say that the Mavs are taking the same shots that they did against the Thunder. That's just not true. That's not true at all. Because the Mavs, through 2 games, have taken, I believe, 9 corner threes. They average 16 corner threes per game against the Thunder. So it's not the same, but it does hurt. But still, it was a very successful season. And I think what you wanted out of this first go around is to learn about your roster in the playoffs. You know, you get into the first round it was hard to really tell what's what. Because you sweep this Pelicans team that's depleted. They don't have Zion. You don't know what to make of it. You play a Dallas team that's a serious team. They very much deserve to be in the NBA Finals. But you learn a lot about your roster in that particular series. I think you learned a lot about Josh Giddey and the unfortunate fit, I guess it is for him in Oklahoma City. And then I think you learn a little bit about your young guys. I think they learned that maybe, Jay Will is not the best backup center for them. They learned that Gordon Hayward doesn't ever like to shoot the basketball ever. They also learned that SGA, J-Dub, Dort, and Chet are absolute playoff monsters. Those are guys that you want to roll with. And so now it's about how do you fill out the roster? If you are going to trade Giddey, how do you fill out a starting lineup? Because they did bench him for Isaiah Joe partway through that second round. How do you fill out the roster now? And what do you need? And so I think this is where they're at today.
So what's funny is, first of all, you mentioned the corner threes that they're not getting in the finals. It's actually it's impressive what the Celtics are doing. It's a concerted effort just to take that away, which, credit to Mazzulla and his crew for making that a focus when you have all those days off leading up to the finals. And I think what's interesting to your perspective on like all these role players are beating us. Knicks fans share some of that, really not this year, but last year, where like Jimmy Butler wasn't spectacular in that series against the Heat, and Bam is good, but there's really a ceiling on what Bam can do to you offensively. It's the defensive end where he just completely took an injured Julius Randle and just took him out of the series completely. But it was like Caleb Martin and Gabe Vincent and Max Strus that killed the Knicks for 6 games. And when you're losing to those guys, it makes it harder to swallow that you seemed to do the job of stopping the other team's key guys and then losing the role players when the conference finals are within sight. And it leads to an offseason of questions. And that's where you end up on this podcast, because a report came out yesterday that, and look, it's well documented for a lot of Knicks fans, but in case you missed it, Isaiah Hartenstein, Knicks center, who had a breakout season. All the advanced metrics love him, and just the eye test loves him as well. The Knicks offense looked completely different when he got inserted into the starting lineup for an injured Mitchell Robinson. And there was just a new dynamic when you could run the offense through a hub of baby Jokic, as we at sometimes would call him. And because the Knicks signed him to a 2-year, $16 million contract 2 years ago, and they don't have any cap space, they can only offer him an early bird max extension. And the most they can offer him is 4 years, around $72 million. So a team with cap space like the Thunder, who have about $35 million, if I'm not mistaken, in cap space this offseason, could pry him away this offseason if they decided to give him the bag. Now, I'm going to play a clip from the last time you were on this podcast, Andrew, where I was told I have nothing to worry about. I could cross the Thunder off the list. Let's take a look. Isaiah Hartenstein is a free agent, and there is a cap on what the Knicks can pay him. Mm-hmm. The Thunder have been brought up as a team that might be interested. I theorized that having Chet in-house and how the Thunder play, I don't think they would go all in on like throwing a bag at Isaiah Hartenstein, but maybe you can shed more light on this. Could Isaiah Hartenstein potentially be a target for the Thunder this offseason as a potential path to getting better, inputting then Chet as like a full-time 4, and next to Hartenstein?
The answer is no.
No. Okay. So That's just like, Knicks fans, don't be worried about the Thunder.
No, I would not. The Thunder want a spacing 5. And so you could argue, okay, you need to have different looks. You need to have like a bigger body in there. They're not going to do it through free agency.
Okay.
If they're going to. And if they do, it's going to be, I don't know, mid-level or lower,
Okay.
And a backup big. They're not going to. Chet is the starting center and will stay the starting center for this team. If they acquire a big, it will be a backup big. Excuse me. And I think they could honestly fulfill that through the draft. So I could see them doing that more so through the draft. And then what they do with their cap space, they could do what they did last year, is that they acquired Davis Bertans so they could move up 2 spots. I could see them doing something like that. Or they could acquire a player who has, a year left on their deal, and some team needs to just like, please just take this from us so that we can go acquire. It could be Isaiah Hartenstein. I don't know. And they'll do stuff like that with their cap space. I don't anticipate them going after free agents. One, they already have their rotation. I think that another thing that I would put on people's minds with the Thunder's cap space is they can make, one, Josh Giddey's extension eligible. Not that will take up their cap space until the next year, but that's something that's on the table. And then Isaiah Joe and Aaron Wiggins can be made extension eligible too this summer. They can decline their options and give them extensions this summer. I would put that pretty high on the priority list. So I like Isaiah Hartenstein. I think that he would be helpful for this team. He's been obviously an amazing player and more of a defensive anchor than I would have ever thought he could be. I don't think the Thunder are the team to go after him, though. So you can cross him off the list. I just don't see it.
So Andrew, great name, by the way. I know I said that the last time. I have a bias there, but it's a great name. Right. Yes, the Andrew Pod, exactly. Obviously, some things have changed. The way the Thunder season ended obviously might have something to do with this. The idea, and shout out to Fred Katz, who's been beating this drum for about a month since the Knicks got eliminated, that Isaiah Hartenstein's a candidate to get Bruce Browned, that they could give him a bag for a year or two, like a year and an option, and then all the extensions can kick in the following year, and Isaiah Hartenstein can make another decision, a year from now. Or two, like Bruce Brown will have to make this offseason. In your opinion, are the Thunder now a team the Knicks have to worry about taking away Isaiah Hartenstein from them?
I think it's certainly more possible now than it was then. I think the Thunder probably have to look at the West and understand that like they just need more size. Just in general, they need more size. Like you look at the Thunder's roster. There are 4 guys from last year's roster that are above 6'9". One is Mike Muscala. One is a 2-way Olivier Sarr, brother of Alex Sarr, who might be the number 1 pick in the draft.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is Ousmane Dieng, who plays like he's 6'3", and then Chet. So basically, you have one guy that is above 6'9" on your roster. And some of that's by design. I think that they want to draft high level players at the top of the draft, which is where they've been picking mostly. And a lot of those guys, I think, are guards and wings. And so they have not been willing to use draft picks or high draft picks at all on traditional big men. But I think if you look at Hartenstein, like you mentioned, like the passing is the thing that stands out the most. If you want to link him to the Thunder, I think a lot of it is the size and the passing. Obviously, he's going to bring rebounding, everything that you need. But I think in order to fit with the Thunder, you have to play a certain style of basketball. And I think the passing is kind of where it starts for him because he can play a pretty rhythmic style. Now, the question is, does Isaiah Hartenstein want to move from the Garden to literally the second smallest arena in the country, one of the smallest markets in the country, to play for this Thunder team? Now, the team is great. The infrastructure of the organization is unbelievable. Obviously, the players are great. You're going to have a chance to really compete in the Western Conference. So, like, maybe that stuff matters to him. I guess I'll throw it to you. Like, how much do you think market and all of that matters to him? Because the Thunder traditionally have not been able to get guys like this. And it's not like Isaiah Hartenstein's like some all-star or something. Like he's a nice player. But like what do you think about the idea of him wanting to move on and land from New York City to Oklahoma City? Like that's a pretty stark difference.
It's a great question. And it's something that a lot of smart people at our network at Knicks Film School have tried to theorize. It's the best case the Knicks have for keeping him is that this guy's bounced around to a ton of teams, and his wife is a model that works in New York City and probably would prefer to live in New York City for the next 4 years, and it would probably be good for her career. Mm-hmm. There's the fact that he's just spoke glowingly about Tibbs and how well prepared he is. Anytime he steps on the court, the chemistry that he seems to have with the team. Shout out to the Roommates podcast with Jalen Brunson and Josh Hart. They had Isaiah Hartenstein on, and there was a very clear. Now, look, all of these basketball players are brethren. Like there are very few feuds now in 2024, but 2 years ago, when he was a free agent, he apparently, and this is shout out to Jeremy Cohen for breaking this down on Sunday's Cap or No Cap. I'll explain that off the air. He went through a quote that Isaiah Hartenstein gave when wanting to go back to the Clippers. And he said, like, I probably would have gone back if they could afford me, but I couldn't take that much of a pay cut, that what the Clippers were initially offering him was too extreme a pay cut compared to what the Knicks were offering him, that if they had just like met the 8 million or so that the Knicks were offering him, that he probably would have taken it. But instead they chose John Wall's contract and gave him a 2-year deal. And Isaiah Hartenstein ends up with the Knicks instead. And it's that philosophy that because he sees a team potentially come correct, and if the Knicks are willing to go at him with the full 4-year 72, maybe that's enough. Where I think a lot of Knicks fans are scared, where I go back to you with this. And look, it is a change in market. I'm not trying to shit on the Midwest here, but New York City is not Oklahoma City, obviously.
It's vastly different.
It's vastly different. Yeah. Yeah.
And some people will prefer Oklahoma City. Like, it's slow. There's not a lot of people around. There's something that's nice about that. I think some people like that. But if you are like used to like the hustle and bustle of New York City, and like you love just the vibe of New York City, you're going to come downtown to Oklahoma City and you're going to walk around on a night that's not a game night, and you're going to be like, where is everybody? Like, what is going on? Because like people don't live downtown in Oklahoma City. I would say very few people live downtown in Oklahoma City. Most people live, around the city, and then you go downtown to do stuff. And so when there's not anything downtown, like if he got like a condo downtown or something, go walk around and maybe see like 5 people. Like people just don't live there. So it's just like a very different, it's just so incredibly different.
I remember having it compared to me. So I lived in Virginia for 6 years, and that was like middle of nowhere, Blue Ridge Mountains, Virginia. Mm-hmm. And that's where I understood how, for lack of a better way of saying it, how the rest of the country lives. Look, I'm from Long Island, so I'm not going to pretend that I know the city life in and out, but I do know the idea of there's more people around. And then, you go to a town in, we'll call it the South, where I'm from, and like you make a left at the light. Well, which light? No. There's a traffic light in the county. And it's that perspective that I understand exists. And like I had it compared to Charlotte a lot, that OKC, like my college roommate was from right outside of Charlotte, and he was like, well, we want to do something, we go to Charlotte. And mm-hmm. It's this really easy city. You can get in and out in like 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that life. There's no mm-hmm. drive through the middle of New York City when I've taken Midtown before. And it's not like a 45-minute stop and go where you stop at all the lights. And who knows, maybe that's preferable to Isaiah Hartenstein, who gets uber blacked everywhere, Mm-hmm. So
yeah, it could be. And I think like that is probably one of the biggest things. Like that's been the biggest roadblock for the Thunder since in their 16-year existence, is that typically free agency is not the way that they've gone because players don't look their direction. They've had cap space before. They've had really good teams before. They did get Melo to agree to waive his no trade clause, which I think the organization sees as a big win. It's like there's like one win there. But like their biggest free agent that they've gotten is probably Nerlens Noel. If Hartenstein was the guy that they got this summer, he would be by far the best free agent they've ever signed.
So that's fascinating. First of all, that's how the perspective of the Melo trade is. The way things ended in New York with mm-hmm. Melo, that was a relationship that was trying to end for a year, but Melo and Phil Jackson he gave him a no trade clause and then immediately tried to trade him. And then he was like, well, you gave me a no trade clause. And then he was leaking stuff to the media, how Melo won't waive his no trade clause. And then once Phil Jackson was out, then the Knicks sat down with Melo and said, you're not going to have a chance to compete here. And it was almost looked at as like, pick a place that could be your best place to win. And obviously he chose to go play with Paul George and Russell Westbrook that season. The fact that that's the like big win for the Thunder when it feels like it was the very end of a long, tumultuous relationship for the Knicks. And Look, you're telling me all the right things that I shouldn't worry about the Thunder. The thing I keep going back to is if they throw him 25 plus million, that's generational wealth. Like, you don't know what a guy is going to do when that much money, even for 2 years, is offered to them. And that, I think, is what Knicks fans are afraid of.
And that's what it would be. Like, I cannot imagine them giving him anything longer than 2 years, because after these 2 years, that's when the Chet and Jalen Williams contracts will kick in. And so they have this window of opportunity with cap space this summer that they cleared intentionally. Everybody wants to talk about what a failure the Gordon Hayward trade was. A big chunk of the Gordon Hayward trade was to clear cap space for this summer. And they were able to clear roster spots and cap space. And so because of that, they could do something like this, where they could offer him 2 years, $50 million. And that's going to, it's going to be the money and the opportunity to play for a team that's competing in the Western Conference. Now, do you want to move from the East to the West? Because the Knicks are going to have just as good of an opportunity next year to compete too. So you can't even argue that it's like to be competitive, because like the Knicks are very competitive. Their seasons ended basically the same way. And you're in the Eastern Conference, which was obviously not a gauntlet this year. And a lot of that's due to injury. So like, is he doing it just for the money? Which guys have done that a whole lot.
As a New Yorker, like, it's part of the philosophy. Like, you're working to get said bag, which is why, it's why I think Knicks fans are afraid, because that's something. I'll just flatly say it. Like, it's something I would do. I'd go live in Oklahoma City for 2 years if someone doubled my salary for 2 years.
I'd show you a great time. I could show you all.
Andrew Knight. There you go.
Andrew Knight. Yeah, I do think that it's probably more of a possibility than it was a few months ago. I don't think the reports that are coming out are false. Do the Thunder to me now the question is, do the Thunder want to spend 2 years, $50 million on a backup center?
So that's where I want to dive into that, because that's been my thought too. When Fred initially pitched the Bruce Brown theory to me, it's like, well, would they close together, Chet and Hartenstein? Would they start together? Are you turning Chet into a 4? Because everything I know and everything I've learned from you is that, like, they like to play 5 out. I know with Hartenstein, because he has that, like, he can play at the nail, you can kind of run the offense through him a bit, but that's then also taking the ball out of SGA's hand, and because he's not a spacer, like in the traditional sense that a shooter exists, it's adding a wrinkle to your offense, but it is changing your philosophy a little bit. How often do you think Chet and Hartenstein would play together?
So this last year, they have Jay Will, the other Jalen Williams. They played, of the minutes that they could have played together, they played 2% of the time with those two on the court. And those two are probably more of an easy fit because Jay Will shoots threes, but they didn't ever play them together. They never did. And I would be really surprised about this still, because if you weren't willing to play those two together, maybe that's a reflection on what they think of Jay Will. That's possible. And that you bring in Hartenstein, who is like a bona fide starter. Like, he should be starting for somebody. But you bring him in, and he maybe just because he's more talented, maybe just because he's bigger, better defender, can slide his feet better than Jay Will. Maybe all those reasons you could play him with Chet. But to me, you don't want to play Chet with a center because it takes away all the advantages that you have. They've proven that they can play with him as a center. They did it for 82 plus 15 is what I said, 82 plus 10 because they played 10 playoff games. Then he looked at me and he goes, plus 15. He said preseason. I was like, okay, that's weird that you'd say that to me. But they played all their games with him at center, every single game with him at center. And they were the number 1 seed in the Western Conference. They were top 5 in offense, top 5 in defense, second in net rating. So why would you then say, that was cool, let's completely change it by putting him at the 4 and bringing in a non-shooting big. Like, to me, it just doesn't make all that much sense. So now the question is, like, do you pay 2 years, $50 million for a backup center that's going to back up Chet? They're not going to play 2% of their minutes together. They'll probably play 20% of the available minutes together. They would use that a lot more. Jay Will is also a pretty good passer too. So like that's also a little strange to me that like, oh, because Isaiah Hartenstein's a good passer. Well, Jay Will's also like a pretty good passer as well. So it's not like there's all these differences. So I would still be pretty surprised because it's still a backup center, a guy that you're probably not going to play a ton with Chet because it takes away the advantage. Like you watch the NBA Finals right now, like Boston plays 5 out, and they largely can because of Porzingis and because of Al Horford. Well, Isaiah Hartenstein's not going to help you do that if that's how you want to play. So there's philosophically, I would still be surprised if this is the way that they went because I just don't know that you pay $25 million for a backup.
A couple follow-ups here. So you mentioned the percentage that Jay Will and Chet played together. And look, it's funny you mentioned Al Horford because the idea of paying this type of money for a backup center, it reminds me a lot of 2019 when I know a lot was made when Jimmy Butler left Tobias Harris over me, Ben Simmons over me, like when he left the Sixers. But what people don't forget, what people do forget is it wasn't just pay Tobias Harris over Jimmy Butler. It was also sign Al Horford. Mm-hmm. And the Sixers decided, like as much as Horford and Embiid played together, that they wanted to load up and spread the floor. And obviously Horford ended up in OKC as a salary dump later, I think the following season after that experiment failed. And it felt like the Sixers lost the way they did. And it was a bit of an overreaction. And it was like, he's Embiid insurance when he's not there. And it's like, yeah, but they just don't fit together. You need someone like Tobias Harris playing the 4, and you need to like surround Embiid with as much shooting as possible, which is why, ironically, the team that the Knicks just beat was probably like the most impressive Sixer team, we have Jimmy Butler and JJ Redick edition that I thought the Sixers had. I say all of this to ask you, do you think, like, to all the success that you mentioned that they had, where they were in net rating, where they were in offense and defense, being again, a non-foul away from potentially a Game 7 at home with a trip to the conference finals at play, would throwing 2 years, $50 million, or just a bag at Isaiah Hartenstein to completely change the philosophy of how the roster is made up, do you view that as an overreaction to how the season potentially ended?
I would see it as a very strange reaction because to me, when I watched the Thunder, I didn't think, man, and I know a lot of people thought this, but whenever I watched them, I didn't think they're just one big away. And I hear that all the time. Like people just walk up to me like, hey, one big away, right? It's like, not really.
These are like the 5 people in OKC you're saying. Like when you run into them, just they're one big away. It's like, oh, hi. Then you go to another block. Hey, they're one big away, Andrew. Yes. Sorry, I had to.
Yeah. Now, I think they're one big wing away. I really think that they need somebody to play the 4 because whenever they replaced Josh Giddey in the starting lineup, they replaced him with a guard and Isaiah Joe. So everybody had to shift down. I think that they need to be able to shift back where they were, but play with like a bigger wing, like a Dorian Finney-Smith from Brooklyn is somebody that I think would be a better fit for them. Because he can switch, he can really thrive in their defensive scheme, which relies a lot on scrambling and using Chet at the rim and then kind of packing the paint and scrambling to the corners. That's what they like to do. Finney-Smith could do that. Not only would they have to change offensively, defensively, they'd have to change too if they decided to like go double big with Hartenstein. This is why this has kind of puzzled me a little bit. Because I'm not saying that the reports are wrong. I don't think they're wrong. I think the people that are reporting it have like really good reputations and aren't going to just put that stuff out there unless it is true that they're hearing that. We also have to like trace to me, like, why is this information out there? Who wants this information out there? I think those are questions that I have too. But to me, it doesn't seem like a reaction to anything that happened on the court, because I don't necessarily think, I do think that they need a backup center. Do I think it makes sense to pay that backup center that much money? I don't think it makes sense to do that. I think it's better to use your cap space to where you pay, if you needed to pay 2 picks to get Finney Smith, and then you could just say, hey, listen, you don't have to take anything back. All you have to do is take the 2 picks. And then you can go flip those 2 picks and use those in your superstar trade or whatever you want to do with them. And then we'll take Finney Smith just into our cap space. Like, to me, that's just like a better use of their cap space and a better use of just like roster building in general for them. That to me would make way more sense than them giving this big balloon payment to Hartenstein, who I really like as a player. I just don't know how. I think he's crazy helpful to the Knicks. I think he would be helpful to the Thunder, but I don't think that he's somebody that you change your like philosophies for. You know, like there are players that you would, but I don't think it's to sign Isaiah Hartenstein.
Well, maybe to keep with the philosophy, you mentioned Dorian Finney-Smith. Who are the other targets? That obviously Isaiah Hartenstein's getting the front pages, but who are some other names that have been brought up as targets for the Thunder that fit their philosophy?
Yeah, I think Thunder fans have really fallen in love with the idea of looking at trades with Will Dawkins and the Washington Wizards. And Denny Avdia is somebody that people have really attached themselves to, a 6'9" forward that can pass it a little bit, shoot a little bit. I mean, he's a jack of all trades, master of none, but he also has like one of the best contracts in the NBA right now. As like he's a good player, and he has a descending contract that hasn't even started yet. Starts next season, starts at $15 million. In 27-28, he makes $11 million, which is a crazy deal.
It's structured very similarly to the Mitchell Robinson contract, where it starts at a number and just descends for the next 4. Yeah,
it's crazy how valuable that kind of deal is. It's a deal that Sam Presti would go and brag to people about every single day if he got it. But it's that kind of player that I think that they need. I don't think that it's. I think you can go find a backup big man for a lot cheaper than 2 years, $50 million, if that's what you need. Like, if you just need minutes to spell Chet, if you need to get Chet 12 minutes in the playoffs or 10 minutes in the playoffs to just get a breather, I don't think that should cost you $50 million. Like, I think that should cost you 10. You know, I still, like I said, I believe the reports, and I believe that there's a chance of this happening. But I also have a hard time getting there whenever I just think about like the philosophies and the way that they want to play.
You also just mentioned, like, why is the report out there? And again, I believe the reports. I can understand why they're out there. But like, so the only thought usually when a report like this gets leaked, and it's like, is you usually want to use this, like if in OG Anunoby, there was a report that like someone could throw him a max, and it's like you're creating a market, like you're creating a world where the Knicks are going to have to bring every dollar to Anunoby. Understood. I expect them to bring every dollar to Anunoby, especially, look, the Sam Rose connection just can't be ignored, and it's why I think the Knicks are in the driver's seat there. I don't think there's a world where the Knicks aren't going to pay top dollar that they can for Hartenstein. So this isn't a bidding war. So that, I think, is what's giving a lot of us pause, is that if you're going to already give as much as you can, and these reports about getting outbid are out there, I don't think they're coming from his representation to create said bidding war. And I guess that's what's, again, it's part of the curiosity of him going to OKC is, like, again, who would want this out there other than the fact that it might just be legitimate that they have interest in Isaiah Hartenstein. You mentioned that it could be like 10 million should probably what you spend on a backup big. You could also just use a draft pick. They have the 12th pick in the draft this year, which is another avenue that you said when you were here last time that they could explore. Is there a prospect that you have your eye on that they could potentially use that on the backup big? We're kind of hoping that happens, so that way a week later the Thunder are out of the running because they just used the 12th pick on a center.
I think Deron Holmes from Dayton is somebody that a lot of Thunder fans like, and that kind of fits like shoot pass dribble a little bit as a big. Same for Kyle Filipowski. I think both those guys fit that mold. A lot of people want to push Zach Edey onto the Thunder as well, which I have more doubts about. But if certainly if that happened, there would be no need to pay Isaiah Hartenstein $50 million. So,
can I give you a real quick? Sorry to interrupt. The big brain alternative universe is that if Hartenstein goes to the Thunder, we've been doing a lot of draft coverage here, and Edey to the Knicks at 24-25 to be like, oh, there you go, we replaced them. They're not 1-to-1, and Tibbs would hate the project that probably is Zach Edey. I know he is like 22 years old, and that should mean that he's closer to NBA ready than others. But to go from Hartenstein, one of the most impactful 25 to 30 minute centers that existed, to a rookie would probably give Tom Thibodeau heart palpitations,
Yeah. And a rookie that loves post ups, just like can't get enough post ups.
Yeah.
I think that might be pretty tough.
Yeah. That not them and Randall together, especially when Tibbs then like inevitably also plays Josh Hart together. And it's like, oh, well, Jalen Brunson is shout out to Frank Barrett will appreciate this. Jalen Brunson's playing in a phone booth at the moment because there's just no space on the floor to operate.
Yeah.
But so those are look, they also, with all the picks the Thunder have, do you see them potentially getting ambitious and getting into the Klingon business and potentially trading up?
Again, I don't know that Klingon is quite skilled enough to be a guy that plays on the Thunder roster. Like he's a really good traditional big. He's giant. There's a lot of things to like about Klingon, but he doesn't do the shoot pass dribble stuff that they want their guys to do. And so that one would surprise me. They just haven't spent either they haven't spent money, and they also haven't spent valuable resources on the center position outside of Chet throughout the rebuild. Like they just haven't done it. And so that would be a departure from that. And maybe it's time to depart from that. Maybe they learned in the playoffs that like, hey, listen, we just need more size and physicality. And maybe that's the direction they feel like they need to go. But again, like in my head of everything that I know about how they want to play, Klingon doesn't fit that. Hartenstein would only fit it because they really like him as a passer. But again, the floor spacing thing, I just kind of can't get over that. And maybe I'm just stuck on that. Maybe that's a me problem more than it is anything. But I just feel like they would rather have somebody that spaces the floor where you could take a Deron Holmes who does shoot it from three. Filipowski will take threes. Like those guys fit that mold a little bit better. And they're cost controlled for a long time. And they're cheap. At the 12th pick, like that move would make a little bit more sense to me. And then you could still do like the Finney Smith thing, like I was saying earlier. You could still make all those moves and use your cap space for those things. And you have a center that you feel like fits you a little bit better and that you have control over. Because I also wonder if you want to pay somebody 2 years, $50 million, and then what happens after those 2 years? Like the Thunder aren't just trying to make a 2-year run. Like they want to make a 8-year run, and so guys will come and go. Like your roster doesn't stay the same. Like you can't keep the same guys for 8 years. Like I'm not trying to suggest that, but I also just wonder about not having cost control over this asset too. Because if you're part of the deal with Bruce Brown was not only to deal for Bruce Brown, but was to deal for his contract, for a contract that you could trade. And I just don't know that that's necessarily what the Thunder want to do anyways, because I think the opportunity that they have in the 2-year window is to have somebody on this bigger deal that can help you right away. I just feel like that would be better served with a wing or somebody that could help you at the 4 rather than at the center position. So I still hold to what I said to you not that long ago. I still think it's pretty unlikely that it happens, but I think I moved from 90% sure to maybe 75% sure. just because I just have a hard time believing that it actually matches up with what the organizational goals are.
It's gone from like, oh, you could start a fire there if you wanted to now there's smoke. And now we're seeing how much those flames develop over the next 2 weeks, which is it's the reality of an NBA offseason, especially when you're trying to contend. Two more, and I'll let you get out of here. Internally, the Thunder have some questions that they're going to have to answer with. Look, I watched from afar. Obviously, I had my own playoff series that we were covering, but I didn't think I picked the Thunder to win that series initially. It was weird. I picked the Mavericks in the beginning of the playoffs to get to the conference finals, and then going into that series, I was like, nah, actually, I like this Thunder team a little bit better. Point being that obviously I saw what happened with Giddey, and I couldn't tell if he was being made out to be a scapegoat for other issues that were going on. I couldn't tell if, there was actually like a rebounding disadvantage that was hurting them significantly, or if it was just like a thing that they're okay giving up because of all the other things that they do well. So in your opinion, like, what are some of the other decisions that are like the Giddey extension that may or may not come? Like, what other roster changes do you think happen with the guys that are already there?
Yeah, I think they have to take a really good look at what Josh Giddey's future is with the Thunder, because he only played 18 minutes per game in the playoffs. The sixth most minutes was down to 12 minutes per game against the Mavs. Basically, really couldn't play him. They ended up having to bench him because the minutes were so bad with him with the starters. And you have guys like Isaiah Joe and Cason Wallace and Aaron Wiggins outplaying him. I think that the fit, as much as I think they want it to work, I think that they have to take a good hard look at the fit and probably determine. And if I'm Josh's representation, I'm like, get this guy somewhere else. Not because they're upset with the organization, but because Jalen Williams has gotten too good too fast, because that was supposed to be the spot that he occupied. It was like the secondary ball handler next to Shea, kind of a guy that can drive and kick, a guy that can score and pass and rebound, do all these things. Well, Jalen Williams is doing that. He was 18, 6 and 5 in the playoffs, in his second year in the league. Like, that guy has that spot is completely occupied. Lou Dort is another wing player for them that showed like he can play in the playoffs. He was really good. Almost shot 40% on 6 attempts per game. Was like the best defender on Luka the entire playoffs. I just don't think that there's room for Josh Giddey to spread his wings. He could become like a really nice role player off the bench for them. But if you're the 6th pick in the draft and you averaged 16, 8, and 6 the year prior, you can do more. And you also just like kill your earning potential. Because if they take this to restricted free agency and he comes off the bench and he plays 22 minutes per game for the Thunder and averages 8 points, 3 boards, and 2 assists, well, those guys don't make that much money, But if they trade him to Utah and he averages 16, 8, and 6 again, well, those guys make a lot of money, Their primary ball handler, those guys make a lot of money. So if I'm the Thunder and Josh Giddey's representation, I think it's a tough conversation to have, but I think you have to sit down and say, hey, the best thing for both parties is to find a trade that will satisfy both parties, whether that's a sign and trade or we just trade you now on the contract that you're on. And then we can absorb salary if we need to. We can do whatever we want. But I think that to me is like the biggest one. And then like the Thunder can extend Isaiah Joe and Aaron Wiggins this summer. Those are two. I would definitely try to lock up Isaiah Joe if they can. If it's under 20 million, like, yeah, do it ASAP. Like, he's one of the better shooters in the league and has had a really nice run with the Thunder. I think like that's somebody. And then Aaron Wiggins, I think maybe let that one ride a little bit. But yeah, I think those are really the only big decisions they have to make. Everybody else is on a rookie scale deal or they're locked up like Shea or Lou are. So letting Gordon Hayward go. If you guys want a Gordon Hayward.
Well, Tibbs would love Gordon Hayward. Remember when Hayward got that 4-year 120 from the Hornets? The second highest bidder was the Knicks, who had a ton of cap space, and unfortunately, we lost him to a sign-in trade. Yeah, there you go. On both ends.
Knicks, go get him.
Yeah, now's the time. There is a mid-level conversation potentially if he's willing to take that much of a pay cut. Yeah. I would not like to go into the Gordon Hayward business personally. The Giddey situation, not one-to-one as a player, but one-to-one as a situation. We were right here with Emmanuel Quickly a year ago, and he and his representation turned down what the Knicks offered, which was apparently like 4 for $80.
Yeah,
and he wanted 9 figures. He looked at what RJ got and said, I've been better than RJ Barrett as a pro, and he's probably going to get that this summer from Toronto, or I mean, who knows if someone throws a crazy bag at him in restricted free agency. So, we'll see if, like you said, if the Thunder decide to make, a decision like that with Giddey. The last question, because you mentioned Utah, maybe we're not thinking big enough for what the Thunder could do this offseason. And, maybe there's a bigger fish on the market that takes up all of their cap space. So that way I don't have to worry about them stealing Isaiah Hartenstein out of my life. So in your estimation, I'm obviously hinting at Lauri Markkanen, maybe some other big name that they have all these picks and potentially could lure a bigger fish away to create Markkanen could play the 4, could play 3 in certain lineups, obviously play next to Chet and stretch the floor. Those two teams have been connected in a specific trade. Obviously, you have to meet Danny Ainge's asking price. But in your opinion, is that an avenue you think they might pursue or could pursue this offseason, that they aren't looking for a backup center, that maybe they go star hunting instead?
They certainly could. Markkanen is up for an extension himself. He's going to be crazy expensive. And you're talking about trying to pay, if you want to keep this team together for any length of time, you're trying to keep Shea, Jalen Williams, Chet, Markkanen. If you're going to pay Dort, after his deal's up, if you do pay Isaiah Joe, like you can't sustain that kind of roster. And also like the touches that they want to give Chet next year, I just don't know that you want to start bringing in guys that are going to demand a lot of shots and take those away from Chet, because Chet, I think, is his second year it could be really special. And I think if you start to bring in guys that like Markkanen, who I think he's honestly like of any of like the guys who have been all-stars, probably the most perfect fit for the Thunder. I just don't know that you want to bring in guys like that now. I think you'd rather bring in like high-level role players that are going to be lower usage, that are going to be really good defenders, that will hit open corner threes. Like those are the kind of guys that you want, because I think that they have like the guys that are going to have the usage with Shea, Jalen Williams and Chet. Like that's you're set. Like you have those 3. Like to me, you want to develop those 3. You want to keep those 3 happy. If you bring in Markkanen, one, it's a guy from the outside. How does his personality fit with the locker room? This guy's coming in. He's a better shooter than maybe both those guys, Chet and Jalen Williams. If he starts taking shots from them, does that disrupt what you have? Does that disrupt what you're doing? Does it it probably makes you better, certainly. But does that make J-Dub think, oh, well, my role is even less than it was in year 2. Maybe I just need to go somewhere to run the show. So to me, I just don't think that you want to disrupt what you have. I think that you'd rather accentuate what you have, rather than really bringing in somebody that is going to demand a lot of shots. And they're certainly on paper will help you. But if you want to sustain this for a decade, I think like you have to really think hard about those kind of decisions.
Well, one of those decisions I hope they don't make is...
Hey, Hartenstein's not going to take a lot of shots.
No, that's why hearing you say that brought me all the way back to the anxiety I had at the beginning of the pod. You did such good work for about 45 minutes to be like, Andrew, don't worry about this. Like, he doesn't want to move to OKC. He loves New York. Yeah. And now at the end, it's like the Thunder could actually use a guy that won't necessarily spread the floor, but won't take a ton of shots either.
You know what they could really use? A backup center that loves money and is a really good passer. You know, like that's
I hate it. I hate it. However, and look, this is like, I think the Thunder have a chance, like you said, to be really good. The Chet leap could potentially take that. What's funny is they're already a 1 seed in a really tough conference.
Yeah.
To say a leap is like, so they'll win 65 games or just 60 wins next season. So already as is, I think they're a really good team. We have some illusions of grandeur if you run it back as a Knicks fan, that just like get healthy, Anunoby for a full season, Hartenstein for a season, Julius Randle returns. Like, you run it back with this team, maybe we're closer to 60 than we are to 50 than we were last season. You know, this is a Knicks team that, with all those shortcomings, was a 50-win team and a 2 seed in a weaker conference, but I just, running it back with this same starting 5 with Hartenstein and Anunoby in the mix is something a lot of us are excited about. And we're hoping we get the chance to potentially see it. So, you know, well, hopefully the next time I'm talking to you, it's about, hey, remember that conversation we had in June about Hartenstein, and then they made the market-in trade and it didn't matter. So we'll see. Andrew, as always, it's great to talk to you, and thank you so much for giving me your time. Before you get out of here, tell the folks at home where they can find you and all the things that you do.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Andrew K. Schlecht. You can listen to Down to Dunk on YouTube and anywhere else you get podcasts. Also, check out the Athletic NBA show. Throughout the finals, we are doing post-game shows with our beat writers. So you'll have a beat writer from the Mavs and from the Celtics after each game discussing, you know, this finals matchup, which I think is pretty unique. So be sure to subscribe to the Athletic NBA show.
Real quick, what was your pick for the finals?
Celtics in 6.
Okay. You're looking good right now. You know who's looking better? I took Celtics in 5.
Oh.
So I'm well on my way at the moment.
I should have known. 6 is like such a wuss's way out of a pick.
Well, so my caveat was like, I think if Porzingis is healthy, I just don't think the Mavericks have seen that matchup in the playoffs. Even with Chet, like that's the closest they had to that. And they, again, I remember how close that series was. They didn't dominate the Thunder. They barely beat them in game 6 and were like, could have lost game 3, could have lost, you know, a lot of these close games. And it was like the Celtics just provide such a bigger matchup issue than what they've seen. And we've seen that through the first 2 games. And the caveat I added was like, but if Porzingis isn't that healthy, if this series goes long, then I like the Mavericks' depth. And one has proved over the other so far. So we'll see if I look even let's see if I look stupid a week from now when Hartenstein is all but confirmed to go to the Thunder and the Mavericks have won 4 out of 5 to win the title in upset fashion.
Oh, no.
So yeah. Andrew, thank you as always for joining me, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.